This is the DDT Method podcast, and today our guest is Dr. Dwayne Jackson. Dr. Dwayne Jackson runs all the nutrition classes for Prescript, a continued education platform of the highest level, and he is an accomplished bodybuilder and brilliant nutritionist in his own right. Now, Dr. Jackson is known in the industry as the guy that you go to mitigate any health problems, but he's so much more than that. This, in my opinion, is one of the smartest people in nutrition in general, let alone in the fitness industry and bodybuilding industry. Please enjoy today's episode with Dr. Dwayne Jackson. All right, guys, thank you for tuning in again on the DDT Method podcast. I am here with somebody that has taken my knowledge of nutrition from intermediate to what I would like to call advanced. Hopefully I'm getting there. But without further ado, I have Dwayne Jackson here. Dwayne, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do and what brought you to where you're at, and kind of what are your ties into bodybuilding and the fitness community?
All right. Well, in a nutshell, I have my PhD in neurovascular physiology. I was a medical professor in medical biophysics at a big medical college here in Canada, University of Western Ontario, for about 16 years. I ran the undergraduate education curriculum. I was the undergraduate chair of medicine. So I have a lot of deep seeds into curriculum design and medical knowledge in general. My background is in exercise science. I was an ex-pro athlete and pro motocross racer for my formative years. And then I went off to university for 13 years, did a few bouts at Yale University and Yale School of Medicine. And then I became that professor. I decided to actually leave academic medicine and research. I had a massive lab where we studied sympathetic nerve control of blood vessels, blood vessel growth, skeletal muscle blood flow, tumor growth, all these different things that have to do with neurotransmitters. But off the side of my desk, I was working with a lot of people to boost their health. Everyone from pro athletes, a lot of bodybuilders, these types, right through to really high performing business people that need to, get their shit together and keep it together so that they can run their businesses healthily. So I ended up actually leaving the academic sector, retiring at 48 a couple of years ago. And now I'm a health specialist that works out in the great world of the interwebs and the Instagrams. And so I've got a decent social media following, and I like to think that it's a pretty organic, cool crew on there. And I do a lot of work, like I said, with sick people and healthy people that are afraid of getting any sicker than they may be already. And that runs the gamut from anywhere from, workout design, through strength training or endurance training, right through to supplements, dietary stuff, and then a little gray area stuff for those athletes that are mucking around it with those things.
Now, you walk the walk also, so you're no slouch yourself. So in addition to basically being the be-all, end-all of doing everything as healthy as humanly possible and then teaching others how to do it, you were a fairly successful competitive bodybuilder in your own right, were you not?
Yeah, so I competed in bodybuilding from the time I was 17. So I was still racing dirt bikes professionally at the time, but I need to put on size because a lot of the guys are in their mid-20s that I was racing against. And I really caught on. Like I loved racing the bikes, but when, the surgeries became too much and my sponsors were falling off, I actually just rolled right into bodybuilding competition. And I quit like in July or August, my last season in 92. And I was competing, within a couple of months of that. So it's, bodybuilding's been a massive part of my life. I did it right until I was in my mid 30s. Had some issues with some kidneys and had to fight that challenge for a little while. I did the dialysis, got the kidney transplant. And I'll tell you, it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me because it allowed me to have this really big challenge that was probably associated with bodybuilding behaviors. However, it also, I could use all the tools that I had learned and everything over the years of education and nutrition and everything else, and my experience, the bro science and bodybuilding to bring myself back real quick. I'm not going to downplay this disease. It's a really bad disease, but I snuck into the kidney transplant club pretty easily. I had 9 months of dialysis, which wasn't really a lot for most. And my organs were all pink and I was in amazing shape. So they just popped me in. Buddy of mine who I actually went to college with, university with, at University of Ottawa, he bodybuilt with me. He gave me a kidney, so we were a perfect match. And I was a long weekend in the hospital. Like I went in on a Thursday and I was out on Monday. So for me, I moonwalked through the experience. But it's mainly because of my health. And that's what I really, really want to make sure that, people know now, because now that I'm, a little older, I've come to realize that all the things that I did, good or bad, for myself in my younger years are the things that are keeping me alive now. And if you get rid of some of the bad stuff, then, you can have that longevity and everything that everybody's looking for, regardless of whatever health state you'd been in, sickness or anything like that. You can make the best of it. And, I feel like I'm a living testament to that.
No, 100% you are. And I think that's one of the things that gets kind of lost amongst the general public in the fitness industry right now. And it's a strange general public, because I was just talking to a friend about it earlier today. The fitness industry as it stands through Instagram, YouTube, and whatnot, it's very bodybuilding centric, in the sense that bodybuilders tend to be, now there's a huge fitness community from every facet online, but bodybuilders tend to be the vocal minority, and that's for better or for worse, because there's a lot of good information, and there's a lot of bad information, and that kind of tends to be the central hub of the information that's coming out. So we tend to see a lot of focus on some things that are, we tend to see a lot of focus on some things that are good, and we tend to see some focus on some things that are not so good. And especially in an age where kind of coaching is almost a dime a dozen. We've all heard the cliche, I competed once, now I'm a coach. But with Instagram basically having no cap on coaches, everybody's a coach right now, and some people look great, some people can talk the talk, but very few people in comparison can walk the walk. So that lack of knowledge, in my opinion, is one of the things that, without trying to sound over dramatic, is quite frankly dangerous. And I think it's kind of our mission as people that are either experts in the field, such as yourself, or somebody such as myself, just trying to be a conduit of really good information, to kind of spread word on how to educate yourself as a coach, or even as an athlete, or even as a recreational gym goer, about how to do things the right way. What are some of the problems that you've seen in bodybuilding the most? Because you're coming from a perspective of what you've had to deal with, and also coming from the perspective of somebody that now a lot of the top pros, and we don't need to name any names, but a lot of top guys that might develop some health issues or might be on the way to developing health issues are coming to you saying, Dr. Jackson, I've got this going on. I think I might need to retire. And in some cases, you've kept them not only going, but thriving and in better health. What are some of the biggest issues you're seeing kind of in a bodybuilding, or maybe just a fitness industry in general? Like, what are you seeing people dealing with that, quite frankly, they shouldn't be dealing with?
Yeah. So I was a 90s bodybuilder. So I came from the time where it was pretty extreme. So I got to see a lot of shit, as part of a lot of shit. I was an open class bodybuilder. I was 260 some odd pounds. I tore both my biceps, had those put back on, so that everything, I have all the bodybuilding, accolades, if that's what those are. But at the same time, highly educated. I mean, I spent a lot of time in school. I didn't leave university from 19 to 48. That's a long freaking time, right? So, the biggest things I actually see, and I've lived it in the whole fitness industry, is denial. Denial is the actual problem. And so, we, in the industry itself, we have denial of our medical system, for example, right? And so, it's a bad place and everything else. But on the other side, the ambivalence is so funny, because you've also got guys that are using pharmaceuticals that are made by big pharma in order to get themselves big, and they're self-prescribing these things. So a lot of times when people come to me, one of the biggest things I see is the use of compounds to overcome side effects of compounds, to overcome the side effects of compounds, when really we're not getting at the underlying problem, which is what everybody talks about in our industry, because we're masking it with denial and the use of, performance enhancing drugs, basically.
So, how do we catch these problems? Is it a blood work thing? Is it just tracking metrics like blood pressure, respiration rate? Is it everything? And how often should we be doing these things?
Yeah. And so this generally it presents itself to me usually as someone who's, they have hypertension, but that wasn't enough to really scare them because they took some telmisartan. And then then they get told they've had a high calcium score or an angiogram where, they got, some of their coronary arteries are blocked by 70%. And their hearts enlarged. So we end up basically, getting to a point where things have gone far enough that it's a bridge from ambivalence to repair. And so a lot of times in our health industry that we call fitness now, there are people that aren't doing the healthiest things, but they look really healthy. And what we call really healthy and looks are, the abs, the veins coming out of the crotchal region into the belly button. And really, at the end of the day, health actually is how you feel, how you perform, and what your organs are operating like, and then what kind of a life you have, overall within this whole milieu. Because the social part of living is a massive part of health, and so it's a mixed bag, Drew. When people come to me, but the main ones really are in the bodybuilders and fitness athletes are dysregulation of cortisol, have relatively moderate, low grade systemic inflammation, usually measured through ferritin or CRP, one of these ones. And a lot of times, issues with liver function and then gut health. And so all of these kind of play a role together. They're all kind of tied together. So really, at the end of the day, when we boil it down, we start by removing things that we know are going to be noxious to the system. So, multiple stacks of different PEDs. And we actually start focusing on heavy, high quality, high density nutrition. When we get that going, then things really start to turn around quickly, even if the person has, issues with left ventricular function in their heart, or maybe they've got some labs back and it looks like their kidneys are compromised and there's protein in their urine, or, we get them back and their liver looks like, we might have some fatty liver disease or something like that going on.
So if somebody's at the point right now, and I hit this point recently myself, I went from 15 or so years pursuing professional wrestling, making it to the WWE for a little while, and then competitive bodybuilding immediately thereafter, while simultaneously getting older and more neurotic and worrying about my health, to the point where I wanted to dive more into diagnostic testing and learn about what was going on internally, looking into my genetics, et cetera. What are some of the things that we should be keeping an eye on if we are people that are dabbling in performance enhancing drugs, maybe for competitive bodybuilding, maybe just to become, in what our opinion is the most optimal version of ourselves? But how often should we be doing things on different levels? Because there's things like blood pressure, there's things like monitoring resting heart rate, and then there's things like blood work. And then there's deeper diagnostics like the calcium score, like you mentioned, and like running an EKG and whatnot. So I've done all of this, but I'm neurotic, so I don't know if I'm the far end of the spectrum. How often should we be doing all these things? Does it correlate with age? Does it correlate with PED usage, training age? Where do we begin?
Yeah, a great bunch of questions. So first off, anybody who's bodybuilding, especially if they're using PEDs, but even if they're not, because you're increasing body mass, quite rapidly, more fast than most people should be. Blood pressure is the number one measurement. It's the canary in the coal mine for our health. And it doesn't just mean we have heart issues when we have high blood pressure. It can mean anything from dehydration right through to kidney issues, and the heart could be perfectly pink. I mean, the kidneys are a major regulator of blood pressure. Stress is another one. And if we're overtraining, and eating a very, very high salt diet, for example, we may be salt sensitive. This does occur, even though the experts say it doesn't. Experts. So we may have to alter those things. But basically, blood pressure is the number one surrogate for where your health sits. If you're hypertensive, you ain't healthy, and we got to figure it out. So a lot of people have trouble getting a good blood pressure when they're bodybuilders because we're usually pretty hyped, right? So one of the things that I tag on or tether to blood pressure is meditation. But here's what we do for the folks that say, I don't do meditation because I'm a bodybuilder. We call it breathing exercises. And what we do is we do some breathing exercises 3 times a day. And when we're done doing the breathing exercises, we measure our blood pressure and do it in the morning, do it at noon, do it at night before bed. And that gives you 3 points in the day that you go under a meditative state for maybe 3 or 4 minutes and allows you to actually have these periods in the day where HRV actually starts to really, really, really increase. So, this is kind of the key to the whole realm is get the blood pressure measured and use that time to relax and wind down, because a lot of us don't spend 5 minutes a couple times a day to do so.
No, not at all. And when it comes to those breathing exercises, do you like basic box breathing, 5 second in, 5 second hold, or what's your favorite go-to for that?
Yeah. So I generally give do a 5 second in, hold for 3 seconds, breathe out for 8, pause for 1, and then repeat. To be honest, most of the people I work with, I just tell them, if you can focus on your breathing for 3 to 5 breaths, then you're doing great. And what ends up happening is like, holy shit, this is difficult. I got to 1 and I started thinking about my ex-girlfriend. So you're actually developing a skill while you're doing this. So I generally tell people, if you can't get 3 breaths without thinking of something else, go back and wash, rinse, repeat. And over time, that behavior, if you follow it 3 times a day, might eat up 15 minutes of your day, but it's going to be the biggest impact on your stress levels throughout the day. And we know this from, a lot of meditation research. So blood pressure 1. Number 2, always start with a really, really good blood panel before you decide to dive into, any sort of program, if you will. And the reason why is because a lot of us have predispositions for issues. And one of those predispositions is, dyslipidemia, so cholesterol issues, and hypertriglyceridemia, so high triglycerides. And as I teach, I work with Prescript, as you know, Drew, you've taken courses. As I teach, I always teach that, if we have dyslipidemia, if we have, high cholesterol where, HDL is low and LDL is actually what's driving the high cholesterol, because HDL can drive it too, and that's a little more healthy. But if we have, dysregulated cholesterol and we have low-grade systemic inflammation, and I consider that pretty much anything over 2 or 3 millimolar for CRP, and we have any issues of glucose, blood glucose kind of, getting elevated up in the high 5s, 6s, 7s. I've seen guys in the 8s, 9s. That trifecta becomes a real issue for health. This is where we start to develop the atherosclerotic plaques in our blood vessels. This is where a lot of times our blood pressure is going to be dysregulated. And this is because we're not metabolically intact. So, and those are metabolic markers. So blood work is key. And getting a full panel so you know where you're at when you start any sort of, push or whatever you want to call it, is going to give you that baseline of where you're going to go. Because if you're doing PEDs and you get ready for a show, it's not going to get better. We're not going to get better blood work as we get closer to the Arnold, right? And so, so all my athletes, and I've worked with, a bunch of pro athletes, getting them from, like you said, sickness to the stage, and I've got them to the Olympia stage quite quickly. We have to break down all the bullshit and start from scratch with labs, super healthy diet, high quality fats, high in fiber and vegetables and fruits and all the things that bodybuilders tend to not eat in their chicken, rice, and possibly broccoli. And we have to get back to abundance in food, in volume in food, in density in micronutrition, and in high fibers, so we can actually get the body kind of operating optimally again.
Let's talk a little bit about fats and fiber, because that tends to be kind of a hot point in dietary practices right now. We have a lot of camps battling back and forth about what the optimal diet is. Now, I feel like those of us that know what the optimal diet is, we know that there is no optimal diet. The optimal diet is balance and doing so in a way where you can actually assimilate the nutrients. But of course, it's not so much keto anymore, but now carnivore is a big thing. And these things are tools that I do believe that they can be used strategically in short term. But if somebody's diving too deep into a modality, can you see them hitting these brick walls that can cause health problems? And where are they coming from? Is saturated fat and overabundance an issue towards these blood issues? Are there issues with lack of fiber that you're seeing more commonly? Are there other diets, like if it fits your macros, that are influencing things in a negative way? Like, all these fad diets seem to have pitfalls, and a lot of them seem to be from too much or too little of a certain thing that might be needed for that balance. Like, is that what you're seeing out there?
Yeah. The carnivore diet really is just like an unhealthy keto diet. If you really look at it, like it's a very high protein ketogenic style diet. Kind of a misnomer to call it that, because the actual a clinical ketogenic diet is 70% fat. And it's actually relatively low in protein, because protein, when we're low on glucose, can be churned up in the amino acids, and then the liver can undergo gluconeogenesis, and that's how we maintain blood glucose. So, so protein's something, it's a little interesting in that way when people think they're keto. But carnivore diet is funny because it's bred out of the fact that people couldn't consume fiber, and because it felt like poison to them. And that's just strictly because their large intestine was so inflamed and didn't have an abundance and density of bacteria in it, because they selected for it by eating very, very low variety diets. You end up feeling relief when you eat a mostly protein and fat diet. That's because the colon doesn't really have to deal much with those things. That's also why, though, that people who eat an abundance of protein and not fiber and whatnot and get gas have really stinky farts, because a lot of those amino acids are making it into the colon. They're fermenting and they're creating a bunch of hydrogen sulfide and sulfur-based gases, methane, and these things. So you can smell it. And so the carnivore diet's an interesting one, because you get relief from it at the beginning if you're having issues with, obviously, fibrous foods. But as time goes on, you'll see in some of these posts, people say they might go off to a Christmas party, have one piece of broccoli, and be like, "Oh, that's poison! Like, I was inflamed and sick for days." And that's just strictly because they don't have the metabolic machinery or the microbiotic machinery to take care of it. So a lot of these diets, like you said, like, using carnivore, if people are standing behind them like they're a religion, then it's not really a diet. Then it's a passion, and it's an emotion. We get this also with veganism, right? So vegetarianism, good diet. Some people just have to do it. They choose for whatever reasons. Veganism, on the other side, can be quite dogmatic. Even if you give reasons why you should do things, it's very dogmatic about veganism. But that's because it's related more to the emotional concepts of caring for animals and everything else, which I do greatly. So when we look at any sort of diet, what is the optimal diet? Like you said, Drew, it's actually one that has, the abundance of variety. And the Mediterranean diet, and I call it a modified Mediterranean that I use for my clients and everybody else in my teaching, is Mediterranean diet is just that. It's got, an abundance of good polyunsaturated fats, saturated fats, monounsaturated fats, nuts, berries, cheeses, a lot of grains, which people really avoid. And then everything is based on high quality, right? So it's, using olive oils for olive, or for our, olives, or for oils to cook with, avocado oils to cook with. And so the idea behind the Mediterranean style dieting is really just to have a variety of highly functional foods to work with the body, as opposed to processed foods that, tend to pull things out and make things shaped like what it was before. So that's, in a nutshell, if anybody's listening and wants to, look up any sort of diet, it's going to give them, the array of types of foods that they should be eating and consuming on a regular basis. It would be, a Mediterranean style diet. But there are reasons for a clinical keto. There are reasons for chicken and rice. And there are reasons for people wanting to do carnivore. So, it's really at the end of the day that if you get that variety and abundance of micronutrition in your diet, that's going to be really what drives the health aspects.
Right. And I feel like that is the right way to go about it because you're using multiple tools. You can't take a hammer and fix everything in your house the same way you can't take a keto diet and fix everything with your metabolic health. Now, the two things that you kept touching on were functional foods and variety, which in my opinion, sounds like the complete opposite of 6 meals of chicken and rice with a little bit of avocado oil and maybe a baked potato. So how important is this micronutrient diversity and this rotation of foods and different colors of foods? How important is that to your microbiota? How important is that to your gut's ability to use and assimilate all the nutrients that we're eating? And how much further can that take somebody, not only for their own health, but for their performance in the gym, for their body composition? Because I think a lot of people are looking at gut health and they're looking at it as, oh, I don't have IBS. I don't need to focus on that. But they're not necessarily looking at the fact that if they can perfect their gut health, that's ground zero for your performance and your physique. Like, how much of an impact does it make in your opinion?
Yeah, it's fundamental. So when you're younger, right, you can do dirty bulks on McDonald's and look better the next day. God, you just go drink 12, 15 drinks and wake up in the morning and go, wow, look at how ripped I look. That changes after everything stops being so pink, in your 30s and in your 40s and then your 50s. So the key here is in terms of microbiota and everything else, the gut health stuff is key. Let's just call it digestive health because that's really what we're talking about. And a big freaking massive part of the digestive health is how well your colon, your large intestine, is colonized with good bacteria. Now, it doesn't mean there can't be bad bacteria in there, but it has to be commensurate with that bad bacteria. And then basically it's kind of like, the good bacteria is an army that just keeps things in check. It's like the cops in town when Hell's Angels are doing their thing. Everybody's kind of happy as long as no one's starting any big riots. So if we can keep the colon dense and diverse in bacteria, which we do through eating fermented foods. We can use high quality probiotics, but generally food's the best way to go. Fermented dairy products are awesome. So like kefir, high quality yogurts, using fermented vegetables that are not, that are sitting in the fridge and haven't been pasteurized. So they're non-pasteurized vegetables. So they're fuzzy and fizzy when they come out. When you get that stuff into each meal, and then you also start boosting your fiber content, then that fiber can feed those bacteria that you're eating. And where they reside and eat all that is in the colon. That's where your fiber ends up. We can't actually assimilate energy from fiber, so it ends up in our poop. So the whole idea that the colon is just a poop chute, like we used to think, we now know that it's actually the processor for all the things that we think we're allergic to or sensitive to in terms of food stuff. And so when people eat a very low variety diet, it just makes sense that they're going to select for a low variety and low density of microbiota in the large intestine. So of course, when they introduce quinoa and a bunch of other fibrous grains in there, they're going to be farty and bloated. And so the key to this whole thing is to treat your colon like it's another organ, just like it's like your heart and your lungs and everything else, and understand that it's that variety of food and variety of bacterial sources that synergize and then cohabitate in that large intestine to become basically a system to take care of these fibers. Why is this important? Well, one, when we talk functional foods, a lot of them have fiber. So, when we eat a avocado, it's got really high quality fats in it, but it's also got a lot of really good fiber. If we can't handle the polyols and whatnot that are in, those are FODMAPs, If we can't handle those that are in a avocado, then that functional food will give us digestive distress. So we can't take it. We have to fix that. When we look at things like nuts and berries, when we talk about colors, even in vegetables for that matter, the colors come from different polyphenols that have different effects on the antioxidant system in our body. So these polyphenols not only help with antioxidant status, which we need when we're training heavy, they also feed microbiota. So they're not even a fiber. They're now like a color that has, micronutrition in it. The reason why blueberries and raspberries and blackberries and everything are so potent with these polyphenolic compounds is because they got really, really thin skins and they grow in the sun. So the sun's just beating down on them. They've had to evolve to develop all of the machinery to battle the sun. The sun creates reactive oxygen species. These guys, the berries and everything, have a lot of antioxidants. So when we take those, that raises our antioxidant levels in the body, and that also helps with inflammation and everything else. And then when we start thinking about, the synergies between having polyphenols, having the fiber, so raspberries are a great example of this, high fiber, low calorie, tastes like candy, and high in polyphenolic compounds, they're going to play a massive role in health and very little impact on your macros that you're worried about getting fat with. So
I agree 1,000%.
Right. So we start adding all this stuff in and people start to feel better. And the variety alone helps with your social life, which then benefits everything else also. As you know, I take a biopsychosocial approach because if it was just me on here saying, eat these 4 things and these 7 things, do this in this order, and everybody in the world did it, hey, it would work. But the problem is that's, all that information's out there. So it's how our diet and our sport and everything else interacts with our social life and our psychology really is what's going to drive, how well we do at things.
1,000% agreed. And there's so much that goes into it. Just even looking at the berries, people will negate those because it's like, oh, it's not adequate for my protein, carbs, fats, or calories. But guys, this stuff goes so far beyond calories in, calories out. Is that a big part of it? Yes. But is that the only part of it? Far from it. Now, I know we could ramble about gut health for another hour here, but I also know that you're an incredibly busy person because you're really high in demand. So I would love to have you back on in the future to deep dive into gut health for performance a little bit more. But I think in this podcast alone, we've given quite a few people quite a few actionables so they can start changing to see an immediate push forward in not only their health, but their performance. So this stuff is incredibly important. And Dwayne, thank you so much for your time. You're a wealth of information. Like I said, we only scratched the surface. So I would love to have you on here again to kind of deep dive into some of these things and maybe put together some action plans that people can use to optimize their own gut health so they can see for themselves how attention to detail while monitoring all the health metrics and getting as healthy as possible can drive their performance to levels that I don't think most people think they can get to. It's not all about the gear and it's not all about the macros. It's about what's going on under the hood. Am I right?
Oh, 100%, man. If you slap a massive twin turbo on an old, 1986 BMW, it might hit the quarter mile at, 8 or 9 seconds for about 2 days, and then the wheels fall off and we're screwed. And we don't want that. We want longevity, right? Everybody wants to enjoy this sport for as long as possible because most of us are using it for the noggin and we don't even know it. So, Drew, I will take you up on that offer. Let's book this after this talk today, because I would love to take an hour and give a straight, actionable approach for everybody to try so that they can see the benefits of how good you feel when you get rid of that digestive inflammation and distress and how well your body assimilates calories.
Awesome. We absolutely will. In the meantime, where can anybody watching this get a hold of you, watch your information, maybe check out what you do to offer for as far as courses, coaching, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. So the best place to catch me right now is on my Instagram page at DRDN Jackson. That's Dr. Dwayne N. Jackson. And if you want to, book a consult or anything with me, just click the link in my bio. There's a link there for you to kind of check that out and grab my calendar.
Awesome. Any courses coming up through Prescript?
Yeah, actually, I had to meet with Jordan, I think in couple days, 17th, I think I'm meeting with them. So yeah, because we got to figure out when we're going to be running the next one. We got some new plans kind of cooking in the works for a level 1.
I heard a little bit.
Thing. So yeah, so
yep. He disclosed a bit. So anybody out there thinking about taking any nutrition course, Prescript Nutrition, Prescript Gut Health, and possibly this new entity coming there from, keep an eye out on that, because I have those 2 courses under my belt and they were absolutely fantastic. Dwayne, thank you so much. We'll definitely get you back on here and we'll deep dive into gut health from here.
Thanks, Drew. Appreciate it, man.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Dr. Dwayne Jackson, one of the smartest, one of the best, one of the brightest in all of nutrition, not just in the bodybuilding industry. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learned something.